All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. I am Evan McDermott. For today's show, I was joined by Julie Dean Richards, also known as the Crunchy Legal Lady. This was a fantastic conversation that really intersected. We're looking at law, we're looking at research, we're looking at the scientific community, kind of going through a lot of our own fundamental rights. What is the foundation for where we are living here in Western society? And as well as intersecting it with holistic health, spirituality, tarot, astrology. Really, Julie brings such a nuanced perspective to healing, to law, and ultimately, as we move into this new era, this new paradigm of living, how we can ourselves become more self-sufficient, know our rights as human beings, and ultimately create a world that is based on harmony, love, and interconnectivity. So I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you guys are on. If you're on YouTube, click that subscribe button. Leave us a review, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Does help more people find the show. I'm greatly appreciative of you guys for all the support that you do bring. And if you want to support the show in other ways, you can always donate. You can book a donation-based tarot reading with me. It's just a one-on-one reading, and we do that either on Zoom or just as a written report. You can always reach out to me directly to do that. There are different ways, whether it's social media or booking on my Calendly directly. Links for all that is in the episode show notes below. You can also purchase a copy of my book, To Martial Love Against Tyranny. It's a poetic reflection. It is in the corner behind me over there. There is a new poetry book coming out within the next month or two. And if you're interested, I'm accepting I'm calling for some guest poems. I would love to include poems that are resonant uh, with myself and what the type of work that we're putting out here. Certainly, if you're tuning in, you know what we do here. So I would love to feature some guest poems of this community and some friends of mine. So I got a few that have already been submitted and they're just beautiful. So if you want to be a part of that collection, please send me just a DM or send me the poetry directly, whatever it is that you feel called to share. I would love to include it and give you credit and get you published in a poetry book, which I think is cool. So just send me a message or an email, just emcdermod@gmail.com if you're going to send me an email. And I can't wait to read some of your guys' poems for those who do submit it. And yeah, subscribe on Substack, mcdermott.substack.com. Certainly, some of you who are watching or listening, that's how you found this episode. Appreciate you guys, and it's all free on there, but you can also pay as a subscription model. And I'm working on bringing some perks for that for anybody who does paid subscriptions. Right now, it's just a way to directly monetize and donate to the work that we're doing here because this is all free work. I don't get paid for doing any of this. So I do it with the passion and love from my heart. And then special thank you to our official sponsor, Tranquil Desires in Chamberlain, South Dakota. And if you guys are in South Dakota, anywhere nearby, definitely stop by Tranquil Desires. It has all of your needs for holistic health, spirituality, wellness, and just truly run by an amazing person, Patty, over there. So special thank you to her. And I encourage you guys, if you stop on in, say that Evan from the Fifth Dimension sent you. That'll wrap up my little intro here, and let's jump into the podcast with Julie Dean Richards. Enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. For today's show, I am joined by Julie Dean Richards, also known as the Crunchy Legal Lady. And really, her message, to put it into one sentence, it's very difficult to do because her work is very encompassing on a lot of areas, making law simple for holistic families, which I know is a big thing of what you do. So, Julie, thank you for taking the time to come on the show. And it's a pleasure to get to connect with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. It's such a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. And a special shout out to Paul Check, who bridged the gap and has bridged the gap for many of my podcast episodes and guests. So excited to collaborate and, could grow the Check clan, if you will. And so, Julie, I would love to start just by, I've, done some digging on your own background, and I listened to the episode between you and Paul, and, been engaging with a lot of your content that you have on like Instagram and social media. And I feel like I'm starting to get a vibe of where you're coming from and what your perspective is, and I love it. Could you give myself to just a little bit more about your background, and for my listeners as well who aren't familiar with your work, what your perspective is and really what it is that you seek to do with your work? Because you're really bridging a lot of areas that I don't commonly see intersections in, whether it's law or tarot and numerology and, all it's spiritual and holistic understanding. Those two things are not commonly put together.
Yeah, for sure. So my journey really started working for a big giant tech company. And my family is actually a, really medicalized family. So my mom's a nurse and my dad's a medic in the army. And I have all of my brothers and sisters. There's actually 8 kids in my family. Everybody comes from a medical background. Everyone is into the science, right? And my contribution to that was going into research and working in research. And so I did research consulting for a really big tech company. And I would have high touch clients like Google or Harvard, Stanford, Yale come to me and say, okay, is it viable to do this study? What do we need to do it? How can we do this study better? And through that experience, I started to see things in the research world that concerned me and that I was, worried about. There were, mistakes, not only mistakes made, but definitely playing with the data, definitely money making up the gaps, and where, we really should have had a little more integrity. And at first I was wondering, like, is this just my company? But it's not. It's the research industry, because my company works with all other research companies, right? The company I worked for. And so it's just research in general. Research is really difficult to do. And so it's difficult to get really, really good research, and one that's done completely ethically or by, the gold standard, the randomized placebo controlled trials. And because of that, just like any industry, when you go into the back room, there's some stuff that's maybe not what we portray in the front room, right? There are some cultures that come in, and we have this culture of like, oh, it's okay if we don't know if these people are human or not, if they're just robots. Like, we've done our best, that's all we can do. And so, it's not our fault, right? If this data is based off of robots, or we could only get so much data, so it's okay if we bridge the gap with some of our other data, right? Like putting in these different things, or we expected to see X result and we didn't, so we need to shift the data a little bit, we need to try that again because that's not what we expected. And for a while I tried to ignore these because everyone made it seem like, oh, it's normal, it's just like part of your job, it's part of your life. But I finally felt, after seeing a completely fraudulent study go through, that, it was time for me to let go of that, that part of myself. And it really woke me up to what was going on. And so I decided to really dig in to what was real and what was not real. And this was a really scary pursuit for me because I had this idea, I was raised in this very scientific family. I had this idea of what truth was. And I now was dabbling in things that were really taboo and looking at things that were different than what was okay in my personal family. But also I was researching the industries, like the three letter industries, the FDA, the CDC, and being like, oh my gosh, they're making these claims and they can't substantiate them. Like, they literally cannot substantiate them. And I'm looking at the studies that they're using to substantiate these claims, and it doesn't work. Like, the math doesn't actually add up. And I'm seeing these issues. So that kind of sparked me to go down a more holistic path, to become more crunchy, so to speak, right? To be into, more holistic things, to eat better, right? To change my diet, to look at my products, to see what was toxic and everything like that. But for me, this led me to herbalism, and herbalism led me to astrology, and astrology led me to numerology and to tarot and all these other deeper wisdoms. And I know not everyone's like that. Like, some people stop at the holistic train, like that's all it was for them. But for me, I couldn't help but see the bigger picture. And I felt called to go to law school. And even before law school, I was telling my husband, like, maybe I should just become a naturopathic doctor instead. Like,
Mm,
I could use this money and like just become a naturopath. I could use this money and just like build an astrology business or something else. But I felt so strongly just called that I needed to go to law school. So I ended up working with my dream firm for the whole 3 years that I was there. I learned a lot from them. I got to help RFK Jr. with some of his research. I'm one of the people who was in the background, like looking deep into things and then writing a report so that he could use it later, right? And working with people like Aaron Siri and the Highwire. And after that, as I was working in this, I just got called. I just felt, really strongly, okay, you're not here to work in a firm. That's not what you're
mhm.
made for. You're not made for working in a firm. You're made for something a little more spiritual, right? A little more holistic. And so Crunchy Legal Lady was born out of that. And yeah, here we are.
Here we are. And I think it's beautiful that to see your path and how you're beginning to like intersect all of these areas, because it feels to me, and I would love to hear your perspective on this, because when we look at these agencies, like let's say the CDC or the FDA, the public trust in those is about as low as it could possibly get. And it doesn't feel like there's any recuperating any of that trust, right? There's not any active measures that they're taking. There's no accountability, which is what it is. It's, I guess, what to be expected. But to me, it,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like if we're going to build on the foundational principles of, let's say what America is built on, we actually need to start incorporating a lot of these holistic ideas. We actually need to start bringing in the spiritual sciences, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
to actually start to foundationally piece together the truth, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are you finding that getting to work with somebody like RFK Jr. or, in the high wire and doing research for these groups, I think that's beautiful and
Mm-hmm.
that there's research being done. Are you noticing as you're immersing yourself in this space, we're starting to, this is starting to become a priority for other individuals? Do you think that this shift is something that is going to lead more towards a more grounded approach in regards to how we approach science and data and research? Like, is that accountability coming for these larger groups that you've already done your research on?
I hope so.
Mm,
I hope so. My optimistic answer is, you know, maybe. Um,
right.
I do think that exactly what you're saying, to bring in this, I think there are, whenever one force pushes in, the opposite force always pushes back. And I know that in my own experience, I do think even people who are the most mainstream people, right? The people who just follow everything that the FDA says, the people who
Mm,
follow everything the CDC says, even those people now have woken up to the fact that we need to change. There needs to be a change, right? We can all admit that, you know, when we're talking about things like even like food stamps, right? And the food that you can buy on food stamps, and that the number one product that people buy using food stamps is soda, right? It's
mhm.
cola. That's what people are buying the most. And we can look at that and say, hey, and that's a problem, in the United States. We're not as healthy as we should be. And, even the FDA had to come out because people like me and RFK Jr. and many other people had accused the FDA of they're getting 50% of their budget from the people they're supposed to be regulating, right? But they come out and say, well, no, it's only 48% of the
Mhm.
budget, not 50% of the budget, right? And I think that is, that's where we're at. We're starting to hold people accountable. We're starting to wake up, starting to get to a point. It's just so interesting to see that even now that the data is out there, right? Like the data is out there. There's no retracting that. Like even trying all the tricks that they could try, they can't get rid of some of these correlations. They can't get rid of what's been undone, but they will try, right? That outsourcing, they will try to outsource it. They'll try to use different correlations. They'll try to use different data. They were trying to lean on one unpublished um, unpublished study, a Danish study. This Danish study looks better than what the VSD is showing us. And let me tell you, the VSD has literally millions of people in it, okay? Literally millions of people. The Danish study is looking at, I don't know, a couple thousand people. So they're trying to lean on this tiny study to debunk the VSD because the VSD is not giving them what they want and the responses they want. So they will have to be honest, and they realize in that meeting, like, we'll have to say something about this, but we'll just try to cover it up with this other study that wasn't finished. So as much as I would hope, I do think there is a change. I do think accountability is coming, and that's my hope. There's always going to be pushback. There's always going to be an alternative route. There's always going to be something, because that's just the way that energetics work, right? Like one side pushes and the other side pushes back.
Absolutely. And it's very difficult to ask the group you're looking to take accountability for them to take accountability for themselves and their own actions, right? I mean, they're the ones, they're in cahoots with the people making the laws and the regulations. So, I mean, if they're all working together, the idea of accountability in a legal sense, if it sounds nice, but to me, it almost doesn't seem realistic for that reason, like you just demonstrated. And, that kind of leads me into the question of we have our fundamental rights here in America, right? We have the Bill of Rights and we have all of these principles, and there's a big public outcry. In particular, you go online, a lot of people talking about like the annihilation of certain rights and the potential dangers we're looking at with freedom of speech, for example. And you look in Europe, in Great Britain, they're jailing people over online posts about misinformation, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
are these threats, from your legal perspective, are these threats as real as, because it's tough to tell when you're online and you're just sitting back on Twitter and you read about it. I don't necessarily, I don't have a legal background, so I don't know what's going on behind the scenes legally in the United States, for example. Are these threats as real as people are deeming them to be here in America? And is that something that we do need to continue to be very mindful about as we go, electing certain politicians or looking at, even in our local communities, how we're policing these issues and talking about them? Do you feel that the legal frameworks for our foundational rights are slowly changing?
I would say it's changing. The way that law works is that it's case by case. Cases layer on top of each other, right? So whatever the Supreme Court says in one case, they have two choices. When they get another case that's similar, they either have to differentiate that case or they have to add on top of that old law. And that's what happens. We get case on case. Each case builds on the other case because we have to use precedent. So we have to use what came before us and the laws that came before us, because judges can't just pull law out of thin air. It has to come from somewhere. And that's a good thing and a bad thing in, in, in many ways, because in some ways it leads to spiraling effect that can either really protect our rights or it can really take away our rights. And in our case right now, we're taking away more rights. We just that came down. Originally, it was called Missouri v. Biden. Now it's McCarthy v. Missouri, and we were basically saying social media outlets, right? Social media companies, and tell them. And we need to be careful with that. To say it's the slippery slope because people are always like, it can be a logical fallacy, but actually we can see the slippery slope and we're seeing it again, right? We've seen, even though we call this a quote unquote logical fallacy, it's not a fallacy if you can look back and actually see the slope, right? You can actually see this happening in real time. So I would say, while I do think there are many great forces that are coming to protect our rights and trying to help us, there are really good forces and there is more awareness now than there ever has been probably. We still need to really be on our guard because a lot of our rights have already been taken. And so we need to be careful about that slope.
Right. And could you maybe outline what our fundamental rights are for people? But also, I'm very interested because another thing that you really focus on in your work is what are our fundamental needs and what is it that we actually need as human beings? And when I look at,
Mm-hmm.
just from my own understanding of what our fundamental rights are, I have a history or a degree in history, right, and education. That's my
Mm-hmm.
background. So, I've done a lot of
Mm-hmm.
studying on the U.S. government and the Constitution and all those different things.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a pretty good understanding on what our fundamental rights are. But to me, it doesn't feel like they even necessarily guarantee our fundamental needs, right? So there's kind of
Mm-hmm.
a split between the two. Um, so could you maybe outline what they are and what the differences between the rights versus the needs might be for people and especially as things change, how people can keep that in mind and be mindful for themselves to protect both because I think both are
Mm-hmm.
in this day and age both are at risk.
Yeah. So a lot of our fundamental rights revolve around the Bill of Rights,
Mhm.
right? So if you, I always say, if you don't know Bill of Rights amendments, then someone's probably taking advantage of you because, we we lose our rights. If we don't know our rights, we lose our rights.
Mhm.
So there are probably more than we can talk about right in this sitting, but we'll talk about a few really key ones, right? So let's take the First Amendment is probably it's first because it's probably the most important, right? So freedom of religion, right? But also freedom from religion in that freedom from the government having an established religion, right? Or the government making everyone worship a certain way. So both you have the right to worship the way that you want. And again, religion, it does not mean like you have to go to a pastor or a priest or have some kind of hierarchical religion. When we talk about freedom of religion, we're talking about freedom of belief and the ability to believe in something higher than yourself, whether that's God, the universe, whatever it is, a Christian faith, a Muslim faith, any kind of faith, Buddha. So freedom of religion, very, very important. Freedom from an established religion, freedom of speech. That's a really big fundamental right. Freedom of the press. We also have freedom of assembly. And people don't really know that one, but freedom of assembly is the right to gather together. Freedom of assembly is you need to be able to gather together. Freedom to petition the government. That's a really big one. You have the freedom to have a peaceful assembly and to petition the government. So that means like you can go out with your picket signs, right? As long as you're peaceful, you're allowed to gather and tell the government, hey, this is what we want. So those are really big ones. And then the other one in the First Amendment that people don't think about is freedom of association, which is about you can associate with whoever you want to. And you're allowed to even make special clubs if you want to. This is why like we're able to have men's clubs that only include men, and you can have clubs that only include women. And freedom of association doesn't mean you have to associate with every person, right? And that's been a really fine line. I would say it's a very important right. We don't always think about it. It's very important right because we don't want the government to be able to say you can't talk to certain people, or the government to say you can only, you have to talk to every single person. So we need to, that's a really important line, right, especially right now. But the government can't force you, right, to associate with certain people, and it can't stop you from associating from certain people. So
Mhm.
that's the First Amendment. That's the big cover. Two is freedom of militia, right? We're allowed to bear arms. We're allowed to have a militia. Um, the other ones that I want to touch on, and I'm just going to big bubble, and
Hmm.
I'm going to call this the privacy bubble, okay? Because privacy rights encompass so much of our needs and so much of what we're guaranteed. But privacy itself, right? Your right to privacy is not in any one amendment. It is not what's called an enumerated right. So we have enumerated rights that those are the ones that are spelled out in the Constitution. They're enumerated, talked about, and there are unenumerated rights. And those are rights that are implied by other amendments we have. And privacy is an unenumerated right, which means it's not spelled out in the Constitution, but it's something that the Supreme Court has gathered by putting these amendments together. And so your freedom of privacy is all about being able to live with your family, right? Being able to, have intimacy with who you would like to have intimacy with, and that's, your private business, being able to control your family situation, whether or not you're choosing to use birth control or whatever, that's your right to privacy. And then right of privacy in your home, right? You can say whatever you like in your home. You can do what you like on your own property in your own home. So privacy is a big deal. And sometimes people are surprised that their right to privacy does not stretch as far as they think that it stretches. And so, especially with the advent of the internet, that right to privacy has really fluctuated. And it's one we should keep our eye on because it is one that could be really easily taken from us. So, those are privacy rights. You have a right to a jury only under certain circumstances, but you do have a right to a jury. Sometimes they can take that right away from you. People don't usually know that. But rights to not have the government come in and search and seizure you unlawfully. Again, that's another one we got to be careful with because the limits on it we're really coming up against limits in that the government has many, many, many different ways to say that it's okay to search and seize you. And seizure includes like jailing, right?
Hmm.
Seizure is jailing, holding you, seizing your car, stuff like that. So we want to talk about the Constitution, which is you have a right to life, you have a right to liberty, right, your freedom. And that's why we're very careful when we take away someone's freedom, where we should be, right? Like being able to put someone in prison, we have to be very careful because you have a right to life and you have a right to liberty. And then, of course, you have a right to hold property. So those are some of your fundamental rights. There's more.
Hmm.
Like we could go deep into the 14th Amendment and due process and like the government having to, give you actual notice and a hearing and all those things before it really takes things from you like life, liberty, and property. But I don't know, how granular do you want to get with this? What do
Well,
you want to know?
I was gonna say, I mean, that covers a good foundation, I think, for
Yeah, yeah.
what we're looking for in that. And to me, it's interesting to see the desecration of a lot of that because it doesn't feel like there's much of a right to, as particularly association's a big one that you brought up that I don't
Yes,
necessarily
yes.
think about much. There's a big
Yeah.
push. Oh, this person's an extremist. Don't go,
Mm-hmm.
let's
Mm-hmm.
deplatform this person, let's take
Mm-hmm.
this person off of Facebook or whatever, YouTube. I've had plenty of videos on YouTube taken down. I just put up one with Dr. Peter McCullough about a couple weeks ago, and it was taken down within 5 minutes. 5 minutes. It only took him 5 minutes. And so that associate it was, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it was just the association part. So a lot of these,
Mm-hmm.
it does feel like that bubble is being expanded, but to me, it's like it seems like the corporations are the ones that almost because they're not the government themselves, they're kind of
Mm-hmm.
able to push the buttons on these what should be fundamental rights. But
Right.
because they're a private corporation, oh, that doesn't apply. We're our own entity. We don't, we need to
Mm-hmm.
do it for safety. Is there a
Mm-hmm.
in your legal view, is that something that upholds because they're a private entity that people can kind of bypass a lot of these rights as we are in more of an online age and things are more digitalized? Because I mean, there's a standard here where, you could say banks are a private association. So what are they doing with
Mm-hmm.
your money and your currency as we move to a more
Mm-hmm.
digitalized currency system, right? So
Hmm.
is that something legally that would uphold based on our current frameworks?
Yeah. So when it comes to privacy and private corporations, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because sometimes, we really want the government to uphold that, like, oh, you're a private company, you can do what you want, right?
Mhm.
Like you're a private association. So like let's think about co-ops for a second, right? We might have co-ops that help deliver clean food to you, right? Like grass-fed pastured meat or eggs. And, they're able to deliver that to you and give that to you, without having some of those FDAs, like having to dip it in bleach or something like that, where in the FDA, oftentimes, if they go through that, right, they have to dip the meat in bleaches and stuff. And some people don't want that. And so in that sense, we're very, pro private. Well, this is private. It's a contract between me and someone else, and governments stay out of it, right? Or, I want to worship the way that I like, and we have this group, and like stay out of it. This is private. But we also get the other end of the sword too, which is what you're talking about, when companies are able to censor, right? They're able to take away fundamental rights like freedom of speech and association, and censor people, kick people off their platforms. And as far as legally, right now that holds up, right? In this last case, it's been upheld and it holds up. RFK Jr. has a case that's coming up. I am not sure whether or not it will go all the way to the Supreme Court. I'm kind of keeping my eye on it. But right now, yeah, and I think the government, because the government in many ways has been the one telling these companies what to do, they want that to hold up, right?
Mhm.
They want these companies to do what they say, so they want this to hold up. There is a principle in law, um, which says that it's called the public function doctrine. Okay, and it's this idea that if you're a private entity, but you are performing a government action, okay, you're creating a government action, then you are acting as the government, and therefore you must follow the Bill of Rights, right? You're acting as a government entity. And the example of this is a case from a long time ago, and it's from a small town. And there are lots of towns like this all over America where there was a company that had bought up the whole town. It was a
Mhm.
company town, right? And so a woman, and I'm pretty sure she was a Jehovah's Witness, wanted to preach on the sidewalk. Okay, she wanted to preach, she wanted to be a missionary. And of course, the corporation said, well, we own the town, therefore we own the sidewalk, and you can't preach here. We can kick you out. And so she sued and said, no, these are my religious rights. And so what the government said was, what the court said was that, well, if you own the entire town, right, and people are living there, well, then you're performing a government function, because usually that would be a government thing, right? And so therefore, things like public think property, and people can say whatever they want. So when it comes to private companies, we could say, and I don't think the court has really looked at it this way, but there is a case to be made that Facebook and all these other places are forming a public function. You could say that, right? That they're acting almost like a billboard or a service, or they're acting as communication, or like the U.S. Postal Service. Like you could compare them to like the modern day U.S. Postal Service. This is how we get our information, and therefore it's a public function. I think I don't love that theory, because there are lots of odds and ends of it that could get really out of hand really quickly. But we could say that they are performing those functions, and therefore they can't curtail free speech. But
Mhm.
right now, it seems like the private companies, legally what they're doing holds up.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting because we just had Mark Zuckerberg come out recently talking, admitting that a lot of the censorship over the pandemic was directed by what the Biden and Harris administration wanted, right? It was more of their
Hmm.
directive. This is what we were told by the Department of Justice to focus on. So in that sense, in what
Hmm.
you just described, It's almost like Facebook is acting as a government entity, and then in theory would be able to be held to that standard. But and maybe I'm just a cynic. I don't know. Maybe I just don't have faith in our institutions. I'm somebody that it's hard for me to put a lot of faith in the even the Supreme Court to actually
Mm-hmm.
uphold these fundamental rights based on,
Mm-hmm.
what we've seen over the last 20, 30, 40 years, and especially the last 5 years. I mean, you could go and look at,
Right.
let's say, the Patriot Act after 9/11. I mean, that's both Democrats and Republicans right there. It didn't matter what side it was. Let's
Yep.
let's put this in
Yep.
place. No questions asked, right? So
Yep.
it's difficult for me to find hope within a legal solution. Do you think the
Right.
longer term, if we're looking at rights and we're looking at what our foundational principles are, is this something that is going to have to be really driven by the individuals taking a stand more so than just kind of sitting back, watching the news and relying upon our institutions to make these decisions for us? And, what does that actually look like in terms of groundwork, in terms of what we're doing in our communities? Because it does to me feel like we need actual action by people who are, because most people support the fundamental rights. The majority of people we talk to just out on the street, they're going to support freedom of assembly, freedom of
Mm-hmm.
privacy, all these different things. But
Mm-hmm.
because we're in the system that we live in and we need to focus on our survival needs, we kind of just sit back and hope that it takes care of itself. And I don't know if that's what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think people will need to be more involved. Definitely not going to come from the top down, right?
Mhm.
Like it's not like the people on top are going to suddenly become incredibly benevolent and fix everything and make all these amazing laws. And there's another case where the Supreme Court, I believe that it's Gorsuch who says this, but he basically says, and this is really important to the Constitution as a whole, right? Something we have to understand is before the US was created, before we had a constitution, all they had known was a monarchy. So they'd only known having a king or queen. And in the idea of a monarchy, the king holds all the keys, right? He is the law. The king is the law. He can change the law any day he wants. He's allowed to contradict the law because he is the law. Now, when we created the Constitution, we took that away, right? We didn't make the king the law. We made the people the law, right? And instead, law has to come from somewhere. In the mind of our founding fathers, law it is not just a fountain that springs up from nowhere. It has to be vested in somebody. And so our founders were really careful to vest the law into the people. And the people are the ones where the law comes from. And I'd say when it comes to this, we are the people something, then the law is going to come from a select few people, from an elite group of people. And that's who it comes from right now. It comes from an elite group of people, or it comes from a very loud minority that likes to parade as if it is the majority. And, we've really made, in many ways, media the law keeper, right? Media, the lawmaker in many ways. And so in order to get rid of this elitist kind of system that we're making, right? Having the law come from a select few who have a lot of money, that means a lot more of the little people have to do something, right? They have to become the law because they really are the law. They're just sitting back right now. And it's really hard. I understand because some people feel like there's nothing I can do. My one little vote isn't going to change anything. And I know a lot of people, and I totally get this view also, that like this system is corrupt. We can't use this system. We have to build a new system, right?
Mhm.
And I understand that, and I understand people wanting to get out of the system or not be citizens anymore. All those kinds of things. I get it. I also think um, the system we have is what we have right now, and in order to build a new system, we have to do something about our old system, right? We have to do something about it and something for it. And not everyone knows how to do that, right? And I would say local, like your local election or the things that happen locally are the things you can have the most impact on, right? And then you can build from there. And that's how really great people like RFK Jr. can even run for president or endorse people or get into this game, is by all these little people supporting him, by all these people coming together and doing these little things. Like, he did a lot of work and laid a ton of groundwork before he decided to run for president, right? So it doesn't happen overnight. And so if we do something locally, then we can have people go up the chain and do more and more, right? And there's other small things you can do. You don't have to get involved necessarily in your politics, but you could do something as small as create a community garden or community awareness, or do education for people about stuff. We all can have tons of parts to play. It doesn't have to be necessarily political, right? You can, every piece you have to play, everyone's calling can do something greater, right? And so if it's education, if it's coming together with your community, if it's starting a co-op to help get people like clean food, if it's just starting awareness, if it's just supporting someone that you believe is doing something great, those are all places we can start. But I would say if you can focus and actually learn something about your local politics, because because nobody pays attention. Honestly, if someone just paid attention and did something, like, you could do a lot. Like, you could
Mm.
influence your local politics way more than you think. So
Right,
I think that's a
exactly.
place to start.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I'm in a town of about 2,500 people. So I go
Mm-hmm.
walk down the street.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows everybody. So they start, sharing ideas like as this. Before you know it, the whole town is talking about these ideas, right? So I can see the
Right.
impact something like that does have. And it can feel difficult, especially if you're in a big city or whatnot. And, it can feel overwhelming. But I think people underestimate the impact their ripple effect can have within a community, especially when we're
Mm-hmm.
looking localized.
Mm-hmm.
Like, could you speak to
Mm-hmm.
some more of those things, like maybe what, because I do think we're shifting, and in particular, a lot of the younger generations, it does seem like they're shifting more towards a holistic style of living anyways, right?
Right.
We're seeing
Right.
through the lies of the big food industries and processed foods and GMOs. There's a new interest in fitness and physical health. I think I read something that
Mm-hmm.
the upcoming generation, I don't know what generation they are, Gen Z, maybe, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
They're one of the fittest or like most interested in health and wellness in
Mm-hmm.
over any of the other generations, which is good. That's a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but could you speak to what some of that, like some of the holistic groundwork people can do that
Yeah.
ultimately does have a ripple effect on some of these larger scale issues that we've already talked about?
Yeah, I think number one is going to be do your own research,
Mm,
right? I'm always going to say do your own research, find good sources and figure out what it is that you believe. Like, what are the things that you believe about health and wellness? Find a regimen that works for you, find something. And I'm also someone who, I don't believe there's a perfect diet. I don't believe that there's a perfect workout. I believe
mhm,
every person is totally individual, and what works for someone, one person might not work for someone else. But I would say if you stick to whole foods, you're going to do pretty well, right? Like, if you can get yourself back to a whole food diet, you're going to probably be okay. But I think step one is going to be working on yourself, right? That's going to be number one. And that's the sphere of influence you have, is learning for yourself, doing your own research, and then laying more of a foundation for your friends and family who are close to you. When I first started on this journey, obviously I was really scared about what my parents and what my sisters and brothers, what everyone was going to think of me, because I was doing things different than they were doing. But drop by drop, as I have slowly introduced concepts to them and introduced people to them and documentaries to them and different things, they have become way more interested. And now most of us are on pretty much the same page about health, right? It didn't happen overnight,
mhm,
but it did happen. And again, these are people who are incredibly medicalized. We started, a bunch of nurses, doctors in the system. And so I think it's possible for anybody, but once you start with yourself, then you want to share with other people. And so sharing cool tools like podcasts and documentaries and things like that can be a big deal. Like it's a small thing you can do, like sending one YouTube video or whatever. It's a small thing, but it makes a big impact, right? And so we can also do this with the political sphere, with other spheres in the holistic health, right? We can send information. So find out for yourself, send information, and then beyond that, we can communicate our own communication channels, right? We can have our own, like I have friends who created a women's circle, and they have a women's circle and they talk about this kind of stuff in their women's circle, bringing back community, because we're so disconnected, right? We're so disconnected because we're on social media. We're always, in our heads instead of in our bodies. And, that's a big step, is creating that community again, helping people come back into their body, helping people come back down so they can interact with other people. And so I think creating a community, we used to have that a lot with our churches, right? Churches acted a lot as like our communities, and sometimes they still do. But now that we've eroded a lot of trust also in churches and other things like that, we've lost so much of that community. So creating that network, and once you create community, that can have an even bigger impact, and you have a group of people who then can impact the local politics, who can impact who's in office. So I think those would be where I'd start. Is
Okay.
that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
and what would you think like the maybe the biggest barrier is for a lot of people? Because it's sometimes it's you want to share this information with others, and it's like going up against a brick wall, right? People have their
Yeah.
barriers. They have.
Yeah.
Is it as simple as just fear of change, a fear of breaking out of the comforts of whatever shell it is, even if that shell is full of misery? Like, how do we actually begin to, I would say, share this in a way that isn't, because it's very easy to try and share something and then there's pushback and they view it as, all right, you're critiquing my character, or all right, I'm flawed, or I'm
Yeah.
this, right? And it can almost send people spiraling if we're
Mm-hmm.
not doing it in a proper way. And I think I I learned that early on in 2020. I'm like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I can't just go and try and force feed things down people's throats, so they're not hearing it in that way, right? So I had to really refine
Yeah.
my approach. But even now, I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of barriers, which is why there's so much division in the public
Mm-hmm.
discourse. There is that visceral that people tend to carry a little bit. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what do you find helpful for breaking down those barriers and getting through to people in a non-judgmental way?
Yeah. So before I went to law school, and even before I started working in research, I actually did a communications degree, right? So I got a degree in communications. I was working a lot in organizational communication. And so when I started working at the big tech company, I became like the communications person on our team, right? So like go mediate, go solve the problem between these two people, right? Like make them stop fighting. And that was kind of my job. And I learned a lot of tools for how to talk to people about difficult things, how to have difficult conversations. And that is something that I really try to share with people. But the biggest thing, okay, I'll give three tips about this, because I am someone, right? My whole life is talking about taboo topics, right? Like
Hmm.
I not only am I talking about like holistic health and like the law, and maybe not the side of the law people want to talk about, but also things like astrology and things like tarot and things like, energy work, all that kind of stuff, right? Which is all taboo for most people. But the way I approach it, and the way I've had success explaining to my family and to friends, is three simple things. And one is building rapport. So, rapport, we often think about rapport as like, oh, you have a good relationship with that person. You're like, oh, I already have rapport with my friends. And in some way, you do. But I'm going to tell you that every time you have a conversation, you start over with that person and you have to build rapport again. And the way that you do that is you can start by talking about commonalities that you have, talk about something. And this is why we like talk about the weather, whatever.
Hmm.
We're like, oh, it's feeling breezy outside. Yeah, you feel that breeze? Great. Like we're trying to make some kind of connection to something universal like the weather, but you don't have to do that. Especially if it's someone you know well, you know what they like and you know how you're similar. So like with siblings, you can start talking about memories you had, with your parents, or like things you share in common. We all do this, making jokes. Making jokes is a second way, adding humor into what you're talking about, right? Finding common ground through humor. And it can be as easy as like we watch the same TV show or whatever. So those two things are really big, just making common ground, creating humor. Another way to do it is, and people don't like this sometimes, but it's true, like giving compliments is
Mm.
another way to do it. And people don't like that because they're like, well, it's not genuine. I'm being disingenuous. And I'm like, well, then don't be disingenuous. Like you can give some human a compliment. Like you can tell someone something good about them. It's okay. You can do it. And even if it's something you just appreciate about them, or whatever, it doesn't have to be a huge thing. It could be even something like, man, I'm so glad that like you're always showing up when I need you, or I'm so glad. I totally respect all the work that you've done in your field, or, I respect the education that you've received. Or it can be something as simple as like, I like your necklace and your mustache, man. Like they're awesome. So,
Mhm.
rapport comes, compliments come in many different sizes and shapes, and it doesn't have to be disingenuous. So, rapport is number one. Create rapport in every conversation, right? Make connections. And then the second thing you can do is called mirroring. And mirroring is what it sounds like, which is that when you're deeply in a conversation with someone, you'll notice that you start to do the same things that they do. So, like, you'll move your head the same way, you'll
Mhm.
put your elbow up the same way, you'll hold your head, you'll cross your legs. You'll see this in people who are like deep in rapport, people who are deep in conversation. You'll see, oh, they both have their legs crossed. Oh, they're both leaning forward. Oh, they're both, and you start using similar phrases as people. You repeat what they said. And this is a great way because it tells the subconscious, oh, you're just like me, so I can trust you. I can let down my barriers with you. And so what you want to do is just look at the way someone is sitting or whatever, and you want to mirror it. You want to do the same thing. And if they cross their arms, count to 5 in your head and then cross your arms. And people are like, oh, people will notice. They'll notice that I'm copying them. I'm like, no, they'll never notice. They don't notice. Unless you are super obvious about it, people are so oblivious, they will never notice. And another way to do this is like if you're on a Zoom, like we're on a Zoom right now, or if you're, on the phone with someone, a great way to do it is to echo the words that they say, to say phrases they say. Everyone has their different phrases, but if someone's always saying like, yeah, man, or like, yeah, dude, then you can throw in a few yeah, dudes into your language, right? If they use certain words, you can use those words. They might say pop instead of soda. Start calling soda pop instead. So you copy their language, and even if someone has an accent, sometimes you can mirror that accent a little bit. That one's a little trickier, but especially if you have someone who's got a heavy accent, mirroring that can make them feel like, oh, you're the same as me. I can trust you. So that's mirroring. You want to do rapport, then mirroring, and then the third one is something simple. Everybody knows this, right? Which is you want to use I language, right? You want to make it about you and not them. So you don't say you are so stupid. You didn't do your research or whatever. Or and
Mhm.
you also don't want to say you should, right? Oh, you should do this. Don't say that. Don't say you should, because especially with all the stubborn people out there, as soon as they said I should do, right? Like I don't want to do what you said.
Mhm.
So don't say you should. You want to relate it back to yourself. I was just looking at this video and it was super fascinating to me. I thought you might enjoy it. Do you want to take a look? Um, I was noticing that I have a tendency to buy this type of thing, and I've really enjoyed it, or I'm switching that out because I've had a hard time with the ingredients, or whatever it is, or I was listening to RFK Jr. and or whatever. I was listening to this person. They had this to say. I thought it was interesting. Can I send it to you? Right? As a question, can I send it to your way? Like, it's so fascinating. So you want to keep it focused on you. If you do have to have sometimes conjunctions are a death sentence. And what I mean by that is, Evan, you're such a great guy, but I
Mm.
really don't like your hat or whatever, right? That but is that but is really killing the rest of your sentence, right? Don't use the but, or like, oh, I think you're awesome and I love you and I really want you to do this for me. Man,
Mhm.
that and is going to kill you. Don't do that. Instead of doing that, you can use I do and I don't, right? I do want you to be happy. I don't want to see you suffer. I do think you're awesome. I don't feel comfortable going on that date with you, right? Whatever it is, just use I do and I don't instead of conjunctions, right? And if we went back to the other examples, right, where I said but or and, you could say, I do love you. I do love you. I don't, want to, whatever. I don't want to buy a product, or I don't want, I do think you would look great in this, or whatever, whatever the conversation is that you want to have. So those are three big tools, I think. And if you've got those in your arsenal and you learn how to use them, you can have a conversation with anyone without getting punched in the face,
Mhm.
you know?
That's really helpful. I wish I knew this all
Yeah.
4 years ago, to be honest with you, once I
Yeah.
started really speaking about certain topics. Because no,
Yeah, that's right.
as I do notice there's a lot of and I don't think it's intentional by any means when people say, "Oh,
Right.
you should watch this. This is going to be this is all the information you might need." Da, 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 da. But as soon as it says you should, it's almost more like
Right.
an imposing type of style of communication, which in turn is going to put a negative connotation in somebody's head right off the bat, and so they're not going to want to do it. So that's really helpful.
Right.
I'm glad that I asked that question and you went through that. When you mentioned like astrology and tarot and numerology, and I do want to dive deeper into that because
Yeah.
I'm a big time tarot reader myself. I mean, I've been reading
Yeah.
tarot for probably 7 or 8 years now. I'm in the process of making my own deck. It's been very helpful for
Mm-hmm.
me to sort of find a little bit of a life map, if you will, in a world that
Mm-hmm.
there's not so much structure that says this is how you live life, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I would love for you to, if you could talk about how you actually found, because, on your path, you wouldn't necessarily expect going into research, going into science to actually use these tools in the ways that you do. And would you say, uh, what obviously a lot of people have barriers to them, a lot of people have skepticism, but to me,
Right.
when I look at them, I view them, there's as much validity within these as there is a lot of the physical sciences that we're practicing within our institutions. So, I mean, could you speak to what your own experience with them, and then how you really measure that validity yourself, and why you are able to trust them in the way that you do to bring greater levels of truth and insight and wisdom, and how I guess how you're able to tap into that.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think one of the big barriers to this is we live in a false dichotomy.
Hmm.
So we have this idea it must be this or this. It has to be science or religion. It has to be belief or atheism. And that's just not the way that it works, right? That's that false dichotomy that we have built up. And I think no matter what faith you come from or your background, you can use these tools. These tools do not actually conflict the way that we like to say that they conflict, or we get afraid of them conflicting, or we get afraid of the fatalism or this idea, that they might conflict with, our perception of the universe or God. But I would say after studying them for a long time now, they only amplify that. They only amplify belief, and they only help you more, right? They help things come together more. And I am someone who believes that all truth can be circumscribed into one whole, right?
Hmm.
It can come together in this beautiful way, and it doesn't have to conflict. And we all have pieces of truth, right? We all have those pieces, and we get really attached to our pieces, and we're not willing to put them into one bigger picture. But I do think these tools can help us have a bigger picture. But back to the question of how I even came to astrology in the first place. Like I said, I was very disillusioned. I became really disillusioned with the medical system in particular. I started learning about, holistic ways that you can heal. I had a ulcer and I also had GERD. So I had like acid reflux and I always had stomach upset, and I had used food to heal those things. And so I was able to heal my ulcer. I was able to heal my GERD. I was able to heal so many things in my body. And part of what I used for that were herbal tools, right? I used herbs to do that. And so I got really into herbalism. I decided to go on this big herbalist retreat, and we went into the mountains and we like cut the herbs, right? Like we wildcrafted our stuff and it was amazing.
Mhm.
And while we were there, a woman started talking about astrology, and she started talking about her niece who was an astrologer. And I was interested, but I kind of like, I was open to listening to it, but I kind of like pushed it aside like a lot of people do. And then she invited me to meet her niece after the retreat. And I did. And we just like connected so quickly. It was like we were like best friends instantly. We were into all the same things. We had so many similar life experiences. And then she asked me the fatal question, which was, when were you born? When were you born? What day were you born? What time were you born? Right? And
Mhm.
where? Where were you born? So she asked me these three questions, and then she pulled up my chart. I had never seen an actual star chart before. She pulled up my chart and she started telling me things about myself that there's no way she could have known, because we literally just met like 15 minutes before this.
Mhm.
And I was hooked from that time on. I had to know what it was. I was really curious about it. And I also had this sense of, I know this system. There's something about this that is familiar to me. I've seen it before, but I couldn't tell you how or why, but there was something inside me that said, I know this system. And so I started to dig, because I'm a researcher, right? I started to dig into the roots of astrology. I started to dig into its connections. I found out, astrology is not just connected to the Greeks and the Romans, that it's literally worldwide, including Hebrew traditions. It is part of Hebrew traditions as well. And it's part of everything, right? And I dug into that. I dug into each of the signs. I started to, just learn the language of it. And I am a linguist. I speak 5 languages. And to me, this felt like another language. I was learning another language. And it started to really piece itself together for me. And my friend she just taught me like firsthand. She is a professional astrologer and has been for a long time. People pay her a lot of money to look at their charts. And I didn't know at first how lucky I was that she was just willing to give me so much of her time and mentor me and teach me all of these things. And then after she had mentored me, she told me, you're good enough to get paid to do this. Like, you should try doing this. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I'm that good at it. But she was, I have too many clients. I need you to take on clients. And so I kind of got thrown into the deep end, working with clients and learning by experience. And it was through that journey, after discovering astrology, I don't know if you felt this way also, but I felt like tarot is like a natural, um I don't know, byproduct. It's like
Mhm.
they naturally come together, right? The tarot and astrology, in many ways, they're grouped together. Not always. I know lots of astrologers who know nothing about tarot,
Mhm.
but I do think for me it was a natural pattern as I met more astrologers to look at the tarot. And again, I did a huge deep dive on tarot, where it came from, the different sources of it, and possibilities of where it had come from, and finding that, I had been taught my whole life it was evil, right? Like it's
Mhm.
satanistic, of course. But looking at like, well, why is there all this Christ imagery here? Like, why is there all this Hebrew imagery? Like, why is there all this imagery that is connected? And why do we find that same imagery in all of these cathedrals in the UK, right? You can find the Hanged Man in some of these amazing cathedrals and Protestant cathedrals all over, right? You can find these symbols. And so I decided to really understand the journey, take the path, and learn about it. And I wouldn't say I am definitely not as experienced at tarot as you are, for sure. But it was a natural extension for me. It was something that I was drawn to. And of course, once you start, you can't stop. Like once you
Mhm.
start digging, you can't start digging. And at least for me, so of course, human design comes really naturally from that, and numerology comes natural. And I could see, and I could just see like all these pieces coming together. I could see how they formed this beautiful cycle. And for me, it was so amazing because you can use all of these systems to check each other. And this goes to the validity question, right? Like you can use astrology to check human design. You can use human design to check your tarot reading. You can use your tarot to check that numerology or to check whatever it is you're looking for, right? You can use them and you'll see the same things, the same themes over and over again. You know, they're telling you the same things about your life purpose, your destiny, what's coming. And for me, part of the reason I found validity in it was just doing the experiment, right?
Mhm.
Just try it. Try it. You know, there's a scripture that says, you know, plant the seed and see if the fruit is good. And if the fruits are good, then you know it's a good seed, right? Because bad fruit doesn't come from good seeds. And so for me, it was really the fruit that it brought me. And it was looking and experimenting with, oh my goodness, you know, is this true for me? And seeing the truth of it happen. And I also think we underestimate in our modern world, we're very expertist. Everyone's got to be an
Mhm.
expert. To be important, you got to be an expert. You got to have an expert check that out. You can't think about that yourself. You need an
Mhm.
expert to do that for you. But I would say we've lost the respect that we should have for ancient wisdom,
Mhm.
right? Ancient wisdom and things that have been guided over thousands and thousands of years. People will say, you know, now we're more apt to say, well, they were silly. They didn't know what they were talking about. They're old school. They don't understand. We have the truth now because we have science, you know. And I mean, that's a whole other story about the evolve, how science evolves and how imperfect it is. But we love to hold on to that, right? Right? Like we're better than our ancestors. Oh, we're so much better than them, but we're totally not, right? We are not better than them, you know. And we have lost so much of their wisdom and how much that they had that we do not have. And so I think that's another way to look at the validity. This has lasted for literally thousands of years, thousands of years. And
Mhm.
I want you to really name me a true scientist, modern scientific concept that has lasted thousands of years,
Mhm.
because I promise you there are very few. Okay. They're changing all the time. Medicine at 200 years ago is not medicine today. And so if we see something that's lasted for thousands of years, we got to look at the validity of that. So I think that's a little bit about
Mhm.
how I came to this, but
Yeah.
hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful answer. And to answer your almost, I guess, a rhetorical question of a modern science that has lasted that long, I can't think of a single one personally. So I mean, it speaks to what exactly
Mhm.
what you're saying.
Mhm.
I don't know any, but for me, tarot and it's interesting because you really have the astrology foundation, and I've dabbled in astrology and I've
Mhm.
seen my whole chart and I've read about it, and every time I go
Mhm.
into it, I'm blown away by, oh, yeah, that's spot on. How does it know that?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
you can't
Mhm.
really deny the experience and the wisdom that it's giving you, because you're right. It points to something that's already inside of us. Like it's more of a feels more like a reminder more so than an actual moment of new knowledge. It's like, oh, I kind of knew that. Like it feels like it's a framework to go inward. That's kind of how I've come to understand it and view it. And I feel like and maybe this is something you could speak to too. I feel like in our day and age now, what we lack is that frameworks for understanding ourselves, for going inward, because we're in such a physically rooted reality, and we're so heavily identified with, I am Evan, I am this physical body, and these are my external circumstances. We really don't
Mhm.
honor and foster really the spiritual side of ourselves. And to me, I feel like it plays into a lot of the concepts we were talking about earlier about us being disconnected from one another, us not having
Mhm.
a true connection to, let's say, even our laws or our foundations as a country, right? Once we start kind of losing the stories that were founded upon, and, we could look at tarot and astrology, And a guy I talked to on my podcast recently, Latao Wang, who was also on Paul Chek's show, he does a great job of connecting the tarot and astrology and numerology with Greek mythology and Roman mythology and all of these ancient
Mm-hmm.
ancient stories that have been passed on for thousands and thousands of years, right? So it's almost like it's telling the story
Mm-hmm.
of the human experience, and I feel we've kind of forgotten the story of who we are and what we're actually
Mm-hmm.
doing here. And to me, that feels like a possible solution for a lot of the crises that we're actually facing in the modern day and age. It's not to go out and change all the laws or change this and change the system. It's more of to, okay, let me take a step back and let me remember the stories. Let me learn the stories. Who am I? Who is this? What
Mm-hmm.
is this? What is this experience we're even having? Right? Because if we don't have that
Mm-hmm.
connection, all the other things we're trying to do, it's almost like it doesn't really matter because we're going to end up in the same place that we're at now. At least that would be
Mm-hmm.
my understanding on that. I don't know, and there's not really a question in there, but that's I'd love if you could expand on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think archetypes are incredibly important. And we've kind of, I think I listened to your interview with Latau and it was awesome. And his ability to go in and re-show us these archetypes, right? And where we come from and these journeys.
Mhm.
And it was something that I do that I'm just now kind of starting to more content out about it and talk about it more is I really have a big focus in my personal life of the feminine and bringing back the feminine aspect
Mhm.
and understanding what is it and what does it look like and how do we access it because we have the feminine really is when you're talking about that inner voice, right? Like not being connected to our inner selves because we're so outer, we're in this outer self. Um, the feminine really is part of that journey towards the inner self, right? Because if we look at the masculine, that's going to be like the sun rising, right? The sun out, full brightness, that's the masculine. And that means the feminine is the dark, and
Mhm.
it is the moon, and it is this deeper part of us. And I think we have been kind of in this masculine period for such a long time that we've burnt up our crops, right? If the sun's out for too long, it's going to scorch stuff, it's going to get rid of stuff. And that's when you're talking about losing that connection from inside of us. I think about that a lot because it is like a very masculine thing to say, okay, show me your the evidence, right? Show me the evidence, show me your sources, tell me where you got that. It's very logical to have an expert. Well, it makes more sense because it's logical. Let's have an expert explain that rather than going by your own intuition or feelings, which is much more of the feminine's job is to dive deeper inside, right? It's that the womb is dark for a reason, right? The womb is dark and it's this warm, dark, safe place where we can create and we can become and we can look deeper into ourselves. And so I think we are really in our heads so much of the time because we're on social media, we're on technology, we're always thinking, we're so disconnected to what our body is actually trying to tell us, what our insides and our intuition is trying to tell us, that we have lost sight of so much of that ancient wisdom. We can't even trust ourselves. We have to trust somebody else to do everything for us. So
Mhm.
that's part of the reason I think, and Paul Chek and I talked about this, right? Like bringing back the feminine is going to be imperative to our society. And I think as we're moving into the age of Aquarius, Aquarius is the water bearer, right? Which to me reminds me of like the woman at the well,
Mhm.
or this idea of someone carrying water, right? Who carries the water and what is water, and this idea of like femininity being that water and bringing it and reconnecting, not getting caught up in all of our structure and all of these things and having it to be logical, but being able to tap into the emotion and intuition of it. So
Mhm. Absolutely. And we are in now the age of Aquarius, which is, I don't know how familiar my listeners are with the astrological cycles. But I mean, could you explain what you think, or what, how I would, how do I want to phrase this? Could you explain like what that shift is going to represent? I think you've already started to touch on it by talking about the masculine and the dominance that we've seen in a very patriarchal society. That word is kind of thrown around a lot, and I think it kind of, in a way, it can be overused and lose its meaning. And somebody hears it, they go, "Ah, patriarchy. They're talking about the patriarchy
Mhm.
again. Ah, whatever."
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
so it
Mhm.
kind of has lost its
Uh-huh.
meaning in a sense. But could you talk about what that shift represents and what people, because I think people are already feeling it too. To the change inward for me as we've shifted in this,
Mhm.
it's been undeniable. But what that is going to represent inward and how you see, as we move forward,
Mhm.
since we're in the beginning stages, what do you think that is going to translate to on a collective scale as we begin to actually work through this transformation process within ourselves?
No, the precession of the equinoxes is, this idea that every 2000 and some odd years, we move from one part of the zodiac to another part of the zodiac. We talk about the time of Aries is the time that they're slaughtering the ram. It has a lot of the time of Taurus. That's when they're worshiping a golden calf, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
Taurus is representative of God, and also a calf is representative of the son of God. So we're in that age of Taurus all the way to when Christ comes and he, is talking to people. It's the age of Pisces. That's why he's represented by the fish. That's why there's all this stuff about water, right? So we can see these processions of the equinox working, and we've been in Pisces for a long time. We're moving into Aquarius, and like I said, Aquarius is represented, it's actually an air sign. People don't think that when you say Aquarius, it sounds like it should be a water sign, but it's an air
Mm-hmm.
sign. And the air sign is represented by a water bearer. Like I was saying, someone holding water, carrying the water. And so I think as far as our inner transformation, right, we are going to a place where logic and intuition need to meet in the middle, right? They need to come together. So air signs are usually preoccupied with the mind, their thinking, their technology, their communication, they're all those kinds of things, right? The air goes everywhere, and it lifts, and it bounces, and it drifts to one place or another. And the water is that deep depth of emotion. And it also travels, but it travels in a different way, and it uses the land, and it fills things up, right? And so I would say the air is representing that logic and reasoning and that communication and technology coming together with the water, right? With the water, which is more of that feminine aspect, the intuition, that filling up our hearts. And we need our logic and our intuition to come together. We need to become balanced, and learn how to balance both of these, because hierarchy, right? Like I hate using that word too because of the implication to think about how we have to learn how to not be a patriarchy or a matriarchy, because some people are talking about we need to become a matriarchy now, we need to have
Mm-hmm.
a female-led society, and that's not necessarily what I would advocate. We need to have a familyarchy. We need to have an equal system where we dwell together, right? We use both the masculine and the feminine equally so that we can have this balanced system. We can make more progress than we've been making, because Aquarius wants to make lots of progress. Its job is very humanitarian. It's very service oriented. It wants to do things for the whole, but it's also very quirky. It does things the way that it wants to do things. It's a fixed sign, so its energy is really stable, and it doesn't want to move. It wants to do things the way it wants to do them. So I would say a lot of this is look like living in an unconventional way, coming together in unconventional things. I think for me, right, no one would ever think that law and astrology go together, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
incredibly unconventional, but it is kind of that logic and intuition coming together,
Mm.
right? But you've got those, the masculine and the feminine coming together. And I think we're going to see that as more people are mixing things that don't usually come on a network scale, right? Because now we're in an age I need to, right? So we are in this age, it's like a web, right? I mean, it is the web. The internet is the web, but being able to pull strings and people really feel them a long way away. You know, people are really going to feel us and feel our impacts. The collective's going to feel the impact that we make personally. And so I think we're going to be turning back to intuition a little bit more. We're going to be trying to turn the scales back inward. I do think technology has a big role to play, especially as we're going to see Pluto moving through Aquarius. Like, Pluto kills everything, right? Like,
Mhm.
Pluto's job is to transform everything, to let it die, let it be reborn. And so I think we will see some massive, massive shifts. Obviously, AI is going to be involved in that. And we'll see how that goes. So technology will be a big player, but it's almost like we're going to have technology versus your own inner compass, your inner technology, using how to learning how to use your inner technology, learning how to use what you've been given, tapping back into that, tapping back into your intuition. So I think we'll see that any age is like better than another age. We like to think that we're better than our ancestors or we're better than other people. And I don't want to say it's any worse either per se, but I would say we will see big giant shifts and that you will not be able to help but shift. You
Mm.
can't stop yourself from shifting. So allow, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, and in the grand scheme of things, we know that everything will always come together for our good in the end, right? Like, everything will in the end come together for our highest good. So I think my biggest, I don't, you didn't ask for advice, but my biggest advice would probably be, you know, learn how to surrender and learn how to tap back into your inner voice, who you are inside. Learn, and if you don't know how to do that, there are so many resources, and I'm going to be putting out a lot more resources on how to do that. I know, to your inner voice, and you know, try to make sure that the inner voice is going to be the only thing that can tell you the difference between truth and untruth. I mean, we can see that, right? On a digital level, AI will be able to create things that look like your reality, and it will be able to create your reality for you. And so the only way to know what is truly reality is to be able to know your inner voice, right? The inner world, and tap into that. So that would be my advice when it comes to this new age of
Mm.
Aquarius.
I love that. And I think you outlined it better than anybody could have because I definitely feel that it's almost like the mythology of the phoenix, right? That's kind of what it feels like to
Mm-hmm.
me. And it's the death and rebirth. And with the process of the death, there's gonna be the stepping into the fire and it's gonna burn, there's gonna be,
Yeah.
and when you're letting go, when you're surrendering, that's not all butterflies and rainbows, you gotta feel
Mm-hmm.
it, you gotta heal it. There's gonna be change that feels scary or you don't understand why there's that certain type of change so that phoenix metaphor keeps coming up for me, and it's like the hanged man in tarot. You just gotta let it go,
Yeah.
surrender into it, right? And you kind of come
Yeah.
into that emperor and empress unity almost, where you have the
Mm-hmm.
masculine and the feminine balanced in working together, because one without the other, it does create chaos, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like order and chaos, you want to find that sense of order, you want to find that sense of peace in harmony. And I think if we deny one aspect or deny change or really hold on tight with grasping the rope, it's
Mm-hmm.
we're just holding back our own evolution and our own progress when we ignore that inner voice. I mean, I found that lesson out time and time again over the years, and I think we all we all do have our own levels of holding on. And so when we get that inkling, that call, it can really behoove us. You know, a lot of times the changes that we need to make, we'll know ahead of time. We'll know, and we'll have
Mm-hmm.
those gentle reminders. Hey, the gentle push in that direction. But if we keep ignoring those gentle pushes, it comes back as a slap in the face almost. It's like, all right, now you got to change. This is it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then it
Mm-hmm.
ends up being more harsh. So, you know, I'm right there with you. And I think as we kind of continue to navigate this and move through it, what that looks like on a societal collective level, it's kind of almost impossible to predict what the world is going to be, but you can kind of feel into the energy of it. And from there, it starts creating itself. You know, I don't know if we need to have
Mm-hmm.
one grand vision on this is what humanity is going to be beyond what our own morals and ideals are, and then just striving to live in a harmonious way with those. You know, that's at
Mm-hmm.
least that's my own understanding and thoughts from what you're saying on that. Because it's a profound time right now. And I think it's a beautiful time to be alive through these changes. It almost feels like an opportunity to kind of set the foundation in a lot of ways for what the world is going to look like through this next, 2000 years of the age of Aquarius, because we're at the beginning
Mm-hmm.
stages, right? The
Mm-hmm.
seeds we plant now are gonna be the seeds for our offspring and their offspring and for generations to come. So it almost makes, for me, uh, the work that we're doing, having conversations like
Mm-hmm.
this, getting out there, being active in our own healing, it
Mm-hmm.
almost puts it at the front of the priority, knowing, well, we're in this era. If we plant seeds now that are laced in deception and, in the shadow, there's a good chance that we're going to have rotten fruit for the next couple hundred years, thousand years. And that's not, I don't think anybody, obviously nobody wants that. So
Right.
I think people really can take a look at themselves and start to know their own impact. And it's because everybody does have a tremendous impact at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
day when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
this about what the world's going to be looking like. It's our own creation. And I don't know. I personally find it to be a beautiful time to be alive and to take part in this. And I never try and leave people feeling hopeless and doom ridden about the chaos of the world, even if organizations and the government are colluding behind closed doors. Because at the end of the day, they might be resisting change, but change is an inevitability. And
Mm-hmm.
if they don't flow with it, well, they're probably going to get left behind. You know?
Totally.
You know?
Totally.
Yeah. So. Oh, it's beautiful, beautiful. So, Julie, we're at about an hour and a half, and I want to be
Mm-hmm.
mindful of your time here. Is there any other? I mean, if you have any last thoughts on that, or things you want to leave the listeners with, as well as where to go and find your own work and the work that you're
Mm-hmm.
doing, and if you have any projects you want to announce or things you're excited about that are coming up, I would love to hear about them as well. And what's sort of the rest of the year looking like for you, and how are you stepping up in this new age of Aquarius, and what seeds you're looking to plant?
Ah, well, thank you for asking that question. I think I would leave listeners just knowing all things can be alchemized for your good.
Mm,
You know, even we looking at the astrology, we have some turbulent times ahead of us, some unknowable times, some difficult times, but just know that all things can be alchemized for your good and that these things will help you. You know, for some people this will be a good season. You know, all seasons are different and everyone's going through something different, but just know that all seasons can be good seasons and they can be helpful for you. And if you're feeling bleak, just know there will always be hope, right? There will always be balance that pushes back, and that's the way that the energy works. So just know all things will be alchemized for your good. So that's what I would say on that front.
mm.
Um, as for my work, if you want to find me on my astrological work, I have a brand called Lila Sage. It soon will be moved over to the astrological attorney soon, but right now it's Lila Sage, and you can find me at lilasage.co. And if people listen to this later, it will automatically bring them to my new website and stuff when that's all up and running. So lilasage.co, you can follow me at Lila Sage of the Stars on Instagram. And if you would like to learn more about the law stuff, you can find me on Instagram at crunchy.legal.lady or at my website, crunchylegallady.com. I do have something really exciting I would love to chat about for just a minute, which
Hmm.
is I am starting to, well, this is a big work in progress, but I mentioned I'm working on this feminine side, not feminist, feminine side of things, working through that and helping people tap into the feminine and what it is. And so I am starting a podcast. We're launching October 7th, and it's called Feminine Alchemy. And me and some very talented astrologers and energy workers and people who are just amazing are working on some amazing courses that will all eventually end up in my school, which is called Feminine Alchemist, um, School of Astrology and Sacred Embodiment. So that's going to be really exciting. We're not sure exactly when all the courses will launch, and you can look for more stuff on my website.
Wow, amazing. Well, congratulations on the podcast and everything that you're launching. I think that's a beautiful endeavor. And, I always encourage if somebody doesn't have a podcast, start a podcast. I mean, because you have so much good resources and so much wisdom that you can share. And so you're creating that medium, I think is going to be beautiful. And, I would encourage all the listeners to go check out your websites, check out your Instagram, stay up to date for your courses that you're launching, because I know you're going to be bringing tremendous healing and, wisdom to whoever chooses to engage with it. So it's truly beautiful. And you've planted some good seeds, and the beautiful fruits are soon ready to harvest. That's what autumn is for, right? So that's that's
Totally.
that's really exciting. Congratulations. Um,
Oh, thank you so much.
oh, absolutely. And I'll have the link to all of that in the episode show notes below, so everybody can just scroll on down. But Julie, I want to thank you again so much for coming on the podcast. I mean, I had a great time talking with you, and it really expanded my own knowledge and connected dots for, like, I feel like this is an ongoing conversation, because the way we can kind of connect dots between this physical realm, whether it's law and research and the scientific side, with the spiritual aspects and that foundation as well. It's almost, as the world changes, how we continue to connect those dots are going to change. And I think it's just you offer such a unique perspective that haven't seen elsewhere. So I really appreciate you coming on and being able to share that with us.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Evan. And you have such an amazing platform. And I'm so happy that you're willing to share it with me and listen and have this conversation. So thank you so much for doing what you do.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning into the show. And we will see you on the next episode. Special thank you to Julie for coming on the show. Excited for her projects that are coming up, her new podcast, her new coaching and services programs that she is offering. The link to all of her stuff is in the episode show notes below. I really hope you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and I hope her and I can continue to have more conversations in the future, because there's so much in terms of intersecting law and spirituality. Uh, we need to start bridging those gaps, right? We need to start bridging the gaps between these areas and find something that is more whole and unified, instead of just being uh, separate with all of our different modalities. Let's start interconnecting it all. So if you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe, whatever platform you are on. Leave us a review. You can buy a copy of my poetry book, To Martial Love Against Tyranny. Please submit your poems if you are interested in being published in my next poetry book. I would love to share that space with y'all. The link to send me a message, whether it's Instagram, email, emcdermod@gmail.com. Head on over to my Substack, mcdermott.substack.com. Be sure to book a tarot reading with me if you are interested. It's all by donation based, and I love being able to offer insight into whatever it is that you might be going through and hold that space for you. And once again, thank you to our official sponsor, Tranquil Desires in Chamberlain, South Dakota. Patty Johnson, you rock. That's going to wrap up this episode. Be sure to subscribe. We got some more great episodes and interviews coming your way in the very near future. and I will see you all next time. So long.